Hi, I'm Marcus Berzinger with Mathis USA. Today I'm going to introduce you to the Mathis Labcoater type LTE-S. First we will go over the components of the machine, the accessories, and then I will show you the components, different accessories. Then we will show you how to pin it. For example, you have a pin frame, adjustable length and width, and for the final we will show you the operation of the machine itself, and for the final we will actually coat a sample piece and show you how we can dry it and so on. So for right now I will take the panels off and I'll show you the different components of the equipment. So here we're looking at the left side of the machine. Right here we have the clutch mechanism with the motor that operates the transport frame. Back here is the fan motor, fan belt, fan pulley, plus proximity switch for the rotation surveillance of the fan. At the right side of the machine, under here is the panel removed. That's all the electronics, the operational components of the machine. And now we will start with the operation components of the machine that you will be using for the operation of your day-to-day routines. Right here we have a connection box for exhaust fan, infrared sensor, and infrared cooling fan. The exhaust fan is this exhaust right here. If you do have an individual exhaust that will exhaust without auxiliary fan directly to the outside, you can connect the hose directly to the flange. However, if you have an exhaust that is assisted by a plant exhaust and draws high velocity, we always recommend to have a gap between the exhaust connection and the exhaust port of the fan. And this is to prevent vacuum inside the dryer. Now here we have the top and bottom air flap. This flap contributes more or less air to either the top or the bottom. The scale is from 0 to +4 and 0 to -4. So negative obviously being the bottom air and the plus being the top air. The scale, when that increases, one increment of the scale increases the airflow to one or the other side by approximately 20%. So if you go to position 1, in position 0 is 50-50, position 1 will be 40-60, position 2 will be 70-30, position 3 will be 80-20, and position 4 will be 90-10. So to start out, we'll put it back to 0, and especially when you do coatings, if you have solvent containing coatings, you want to probably direct a little bit more air to the bottom. This will heat the sample from the bottom up and drive out the solvents before you form a skin on your coating sample. Now we're moving to this here is the controlling head. All operations are controlled from here. This, when you originally start the machine up with the main switch down here, when it has fully started up, it will say system ready. It will give you a time and date, and you can proceed to the next step, to the main screen, by either pressing right here, or you can press on the home screen. That will get you to the main operation menu of the dryer. At the bottom you have controls for surface temperature. That is the infrared parameter here. So you have 3 modes. Normal mode in 1, that means the operation is only monitoring the surface temperature of an area right here. In mode A allows you to enter a trigger temperature which should always be about 5 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Fahrenheit lower than the circulating air temperature of your dryer. And what that will do is it will wait for that trigger temperature to be reached before it will start the dwell time. As an example, if we have a 30-second dwell time, and the coating is wet, the frame will go in, it will start to dry, but the dwell time will not start until, say, 100 degrees is reached, and then it will start counting down. And we have the third option, which is mode B, and this means the dwell time of, say, 30 seconds. So in mode A, with the example given before, the total time will be displayed and maybe 1.5 minutes, but your dwell time at the temperature, trigger temperature, was only 30 seconds. Now if you take the example with mode B, if you have a 30-second dwell time, the dwell time will start immediately, but the trigger temperature will start a second timer to tell you how long was your sample exposed at a certain temperature or higher. So that's the infrared sensor right here. This is a cooling fan for the infrared sensor. It has two functions. One is to keep the cooling fan, the infrared barometer, cool. The other is to keep dust off, because we have essentially we have a hole inside in the lid that will, for the infrared beam to pass through and measure the surface temperature on the sample. So in normal operation, we have a fan operation button over here and heating operation button just above it. We have a surface temperature indicator for the setting the trigger temperature, and it will also display the actual temperature. And here in the right corner we have the circulating air temperature. So by clicking on it, I can enter a desired dwell temperature of, I'm putting in 120 degrees Celsius as an example. Down here we have the dwell time input. The dwell time input is in two steps. We have seconds and we have a minute field. So if you press on the right side, we can enter the seconds and we'll confirm with OK. On the left side you can enter the minutes and confirm with OK. Down here we have the fan speed input. The fan speed can be regulated, and that obviously gives you the air velocity inside the dryer. It has a minimum air fan speed of 700 RPM and the maximum is 2300 RPM. When you heat up the dryer, it's always recommended to use higher RPM settings, because that circulates more air across the heating elements and therefore keeps them from overheating, and there's also an overtemperature sensor. So if you have very low airflow, it is a potential that the overtemperature sensor will be triggered. And the more airflow, the faster is the heat up cycle of the machine. So for our example, we'll put in 1250 RPM and we press OK. We have on the right side, we have a cool on function, and what that does is, if you're done with working either during the day or at 5 o'clock, all you have to do is press on cooling and the machine will cool down until it reaches 90 degrees Celsius or 194 Fahrenheit, and then it will shut down the fan and essentially be standby for you in the morning or before you leave, and you can turn the main switch off. Over here we have trending. Trending will allow you a collection of data via a USB stick that is can be plugged in at the back. This is a very useful tool, especially if you have an infrared sensor, because it will record the dip in temperature and the recovery rate of the or the heat up cycle of the surface, of the coated surface. And to start that, you would be pressing trending on, and when you're done with it, then you can go back to the main menu. When you're done with it, you see right here it shows up in a green line. When you're done with it, then you can press trending on. You also have functions of setting the trending intervals, so how many times will it record a data point. And you have an option of naming a file that you can create on the USB stick. Those files can be imported into Excel for data processing and for presentations. So when we go back, now to start the machine, we can press fan on and then press heat on, and that will start the heating cycle. Now, if I press the fan off, the heating elements will fall off as well. Because it's interlocked, the heating elements can never be on unless the fan is on. Vice versa, if I press heat, the fan will come automatically. And you can hear now the fan blowing and the exhaust blowing. And we'll connect this exhaust pipe here, because we're exhausting directly through our roof here. And over here on the right side, we have 3 buttons. This is an emergency button. If I hit this, I have an alarm and it will shut the entire machine down. And you hear the beeping. To start it back out, you pull the button out and press start or heat again, and then the machine will start back up. For the frame operation, we have an in and an out button. When I press in, the frame will enter. If I want to prematurely eject the frame, I can press out. Otherwise, if you don't press out, the time is up, the frame will travel to the outside automatically. And I will demonstrate, because there is also an alarm. There will be an alarm sounding at the exit 4 seconds prior to exiting the dryer. An alarm will start. So I set a dwell time of 10 seconds. I sent the frame in. And now it's letting you know the frame is coming back out. In addition, I showed you the clutch earlier. The clutch prevents, if somebody's standing in front of it or an object is hindering the frame from traveling out, the clutch will actually stop it. You can see I can hold it with one hand. And the frame operation is for 2 seconds. So that means the frame motor is engaged for 2 seconds. If the frame is not in after 2 seconds, it will stop. So the frame may be half in or half out. So I took these 2 pin plates. These are pin plates. And we're going to be operating with a pin frame adjustable in length and width today. So we're going to utilize it. Oops. And I caution you, the pins are very sharp. So injury is possible. So to show you, this is the frame assembly. Now for coating, it is important to remember that the side rails, these are the side rails, they have to be all the way to the outside. So what we do is we have knurled screws for these side rails, and what we can loosen these, and then we'll move it all the way to the outside. So it's parallel to the rod here. same thing on the other side. And this is important to have them all the way to the outside because our coating roller will fit in between. So I'll leave this here for right now. Down here, we usually keep our coating accessories in this box. This is supplied with the machine. This is the undercarriage, and please note the wheels with swivel wheels with brakes. They go to the front of the machine. So in my accessory box, I have 3 rollers. I will tilt it a little bit so you can see that. So we have 3 rollers. 2 rollers have ball bearings, and 1 roller is a fixed roller. Then we have a lever. Actually, the lever is for a paper foil frame, so not everybody will have levers like these. However, these are we call star handles, and they're used to tension the fabric on the frame or the whatever substrate it may be. Also in here is a tool. This is a tool for the blanket to adjust the rubber blanket, and the rubber blanket is actually underneath here. This is a rubber blanket. And then we also have standard side dams. They go and mount to the blade. And the last thing here in this box is the actual doctor knife shape A. With this mechanism, so this is the coating mechanism, and this pulls out, and the handle I showed you at the very beginning is here on the left side. We lift this up to bring you into contact with the substrate. Now I will show you, we have 3 ways of coating with this mechanism. So there is knife over roll. This is the most accurate coating method because the gap between knife and roller is consistent. Then we have a floating knife, and I will show you that as a second. And then we have the rubber blanket knife. So to show you the knife over roll first, we take the solid steel roll that doesn't have any ball bearings, and we insert it into the center of our rake, and we take the knife and the knife is inserted. Maybe you can zoom in a little bit. We see here we have a notch here, and the same obviously over here. It's inserted into, and then we have a rake to hold the knife in place. Okay? So this is the knife over roll method. So the solid roller and the knife sits straight above it. So this is one method. And this is a trough that will hold your knife that will also be delivered with your machine. So the next method I'll show you is the floating knife. The floating knife, you have the 2 ball bearing rollers, so you can see these are the Teflon discs covering the ball bearings. We insert these in the outer positions of the rake. I'm turning the fan down so it's not too noisy. And we can also unhook this. so it's a little quieter. So the floating knife is essentially, the rollers are on the outside and the knife sits in between the rollers. Now this is very often used in textile applications because it allows you to press the knife into the cloth and create a V shape. So the last option that we have with this device is the rubber blanket. With the rubber blanket you will need the tool, and the rubber blanket, essentially we use the two rollers and we insert them into the blanket. And we set one roll into place. And now with the second roll, if we can place it in the rake, in the outside rake, with one on one side, that's good. If the blanket is too tight, we may have to use the tool for both sides. However, to do this, what you want to do is you want to essentially hold the bottom of the coating device and the top with your thumb, so you squeeze this together. It is very important that you don't press down on the coating device itself, otherwise that will potentially over time it will get out of alignment. So what I do is I lift this roll up a little bit, I insert my tool and I start squeezing until it pops into place up here. If like in my position now, the blanket is not entirely in the center, so I can lift it out again and move the blanket over to the right a little bit. Okay. And then we do the same thing again. So we want to squeeze between this rake and here. We don't want to exert force downward onto the coating device. And now when you're in this position, you can see that the knife fits in between here and it will exert force onto, and you can obviously with these two clocks you can adjust the height of the knife, and this will be our next instruction. Before we start out coating, we need to verify where are our clocks, how is the adjustment and the calibration. So what we do is we take these out again, obviously. And we utilize the solid roller. We insert it into the center of the machine. We make sure we are somewhere up so we don't press the knife blade into the steel roller here. And you see these are, there's already side dams, they're already inserted. So there's ball catches that hold that side dam in place. And that's for coating the entire width of the blade. If you were to coat smaller pieces, we could offer you adjustable side dams as well. So then we insert the knife in the position we want it to be in. Usually we coat at 90 degrees angle to the substrate and we lock it in place. And a very useful tool is a bar lamp. So I utilize this to find the zero position of the knife. So I will turn it down. I don't want to turn down one side only because that would potentially push the edge of the blade into the knife. So I want to make small adjustments on both sides. And I will turn it down and find my zero position. And zero position is essentially when you can barely see any light coming through the gap here, and we define that as zero. It's also important that when you do this adjustment, when you start moving the handle, the clock starts moving, you have to see immediately a light gap. So you don't want to put force on it, but every time you move this, you should immediately see a change in the light gap, even the smallest movement. So once we have found our zero position, we can now adjust our clocks to read zero. Now there is also another way to adjust the knife, and that is with a feeler gauge, and that's actually the one method that is described in the operation manual. Me personally, I prefer this method, but you could also use a feeler gauge, say for example 1/10 of a millimeter, and find where is the position the best, and then set the zero position that way. Now, to set the zero position, because you see right now the clocks are not, they're off. So this knife obviously was not adjusted to work with this coder prior. So we use a Allen wrench. It's a size 3. And we can make adjustments. If, like over here, we have an adjustment of 340 microns off the 0 point. And over here we have a negative 100 microns off the 0 point. So we have clamps on this side that have Allen screws, and we loosen this up, and now we have the possibility to move the clock. You can see how the dial is turning. We can move it up and down. Now the clock, if you look at the clock, I will come a little bit closer. The clock is in increments of 1/100th of a millimeter. So that means the black dial, one full turn of the black dial will be 1 millimeter. So 100 increments is one full turn. The red needle, one increment of the red needle is 1 millimeter. So I will put this back into place, and I turn it down. Now, because we have the possibility of adjusting for negative, what we do is we put the clocks, so we have 10 and 0. So 0 being at the top, and then I can tighten the clock. And it is very important, you don't want to over tighten these clamps, as this will clamp down on the shaft here. And what I want to make sure is that the clock sits firm, but I also want to make sure that when I pull this up, that it will always return to the same position. I will do this on the same side, and when we come back, we will work on pinning the fabric and how to coat the fabric. Alright, so I have now adjusted both clocks to read 0, and before I take the knife out, I can make sure that I am in the proper position, because if I bump into the handles, that will immediately adjust the setting. But we are perfectly at 0, and so we'll set this at 0, turn off our lamp. And what's important now is that before I take the knife out, I want to raise it up a little bit. So we'll turn counterclockwise to lift up the knife a little bit, and we have a gap so we can see through. And then you can loosen the knife by releasing the levers. Place the knife up here, and we have the roller by itself. Now we will move to the next step, and that's the frame. So we have this pin frame, we can either pin the fabric on the table, or we can also pin the fabric directly on the machine. Some people prefer on the machine, others prefer on the table. I personally prefer doing it on the machine because the frame is held in place. So I have a sample here that we're going to be pinning, and we have two options to pin a brush that will actually be supplied with the machine. Now, the brush works perfectly fine for pretty much all the fabrics, except if the fabric is like a very loose knit fabric, then sometimes the bristle will pull the fabric back off the pins. If that is the case, what you can use is like this is a towel, wrapped up towel, and you can use that to pin down the fabric, and the brush will be like this. So with our fabric here today, I will be using the brush, and we will start pinning in the back or the front, depending on how you look at the machine. So this will be the front, it goes in first, this will be the back, or this is the back, whichever way you look at the machine. So we'll place it on the pins, and we'll tap it down. And again, you want to be very careful because the pins are extremely sharp. And next I put up the front, and I pin it down. And now we have to bring out our tools, our star handles. So the star handles, they fit on these 4-edged screws, and it's very crucial that you do not leave those on the frame when the frame travels in, because they may fall off inside the dryer and not come back out due to vibration. But what you want to do is you want to loosen these, and then put some tension on. You want equal tension on the scale. There is scales from 0 to 6 kilopounds. Not really relevant. You just want to have them equal tension on both sides, and you see there you have a pretty good fabric tension front to back. And then again, you want to take off the star handles, and what you can do now is you start pulling the frame or the fabric, and you start pinning it up on the sides. And the same side, same thing on the right side. We'll pull it a little bit. And we'll pin it onto the pins here. Until you're happy with your result. And so if you want to bring in the camera a little bit, then we can see, get a sample of the frame. So we see we have a pretty smooth surface here. We could do a little bit better job here, but I mean, me personally, I'm pretty satisfied because we will only be coating this section essentially. So next is coating. So first we want to determine how much do I want to add coating. So we know 0 is knife touching the roll, so we got to consider the substrate being the fabric in our case. How thick is it? Plus whatever coat weight we want to add. I didn't mention before, but you would have another option as well. You could set the clocks to be 0 when the knife touches the fabric. However, because a lot of people have different or varying substrate thicknesses, it is not necessarily the best method, because you would have to readjust the zero position every time you change the substrate. If you have the same substrate all the time, then that's no problem. You can do that. And the way you would do it is essentially the same as we did with the zero position adjustment, but you would then change the dial to whatever that position was, and you could loosen these knobs and turn the zero to that position. Then you would have knife touching the substrate being zero. So, but what I wanted to show you, an important factor. So when we lift up the coating device, we want to bring it forward a little bit, and we want to raise it up. And an important factor is, right now, here I feel the roll supporting the substrate, and this is crucial, because the roll needs to be supporting the substrate the entire travel of the frame. So I can touch my fingers here, and I feel the roll passing underneath, and that's the way it should be. So that we have a guarantee that the coating thickness that we apply is the same for the entire length of the coating. And you see here I come to the end, so the knife will be about here. And what I usually do is I use some masking tape. Okay. Didn't want to play along here. So I use the masking tape, and I place it at the end of the travel. So this way, any excess product will be deposited on the masking tape. Yes, that's probably a good position for it. So remnant coating solution will be deposited onto the masking tape, and I can then either remove the masking tape before drying or after drying. So we're going to be coating some edible film solution today, and we're going to make a fairly small coating. Since I don't know what the thickness is of my substrate, I'm going to insert the knife, and I'm putting into a 90-degree angle, so the substrate and the cloth form a 90-degree angle. Okay, and now I see I have clearance, and we have 1 millimeter over here, and we have about 700 micrometers over here, and now I can already feel some dragging. So what I'll do is I'll make an 800 micrometer coating addition. Now when you adjust the clocks, it is always a good idea to go beyond the set point that you're achieving and then turn back slightly. So to relieve any tension that may be on the shaft. And then again you can check, and it has to return to the same position. Furthermore, you want to make sure that you don't adjust one side first and then the other. You want to make small adjustments one by one until you get the position that you're happy with. Now I can turn these side dams. I put them onto the fabric, and I need to obviously set my dryer. So we want to increase the temperature is at 120 degrees Celsius. We want a surface temperature of 105. Not all customers have the surface temperature measuring device, so it may or may not be relevant. So we have 120 degrees Celsius, and I want to achieve a 2-minute and 30-second dwell time. and we need a little bit of air velocity. I would say about 1500 for our example here would be fine. And at this point we are ready to pour the coating solution onto our substrate. And at this point we'll pull it forward and now we'll remove the knife, lower the coating head, and it's always a good idea to have a trash can nearby, and this will give you a nice and clean edge in the front. And we are ready to send the sample into the dryer. And we will come back shortly before it pops out. Alright, so we have now 14 seconds left, and it's going to come back out. Voila. And we can now remove the cloth. We loosen the tensioning device, and it's important again to keep the star handles in your hand, but also not to over tighten these, because they can strip, the threads can strip, and then you have to potentially replace the whole tensioning bar. So we have loosened that, and we can pull the fabric off, and we essentially have completed a successful trial with a coated substrate. And that pretty much concludes our training. What I wanted to show you as last thing, I mentioned earlier the cool down, the quick cool on. When we press this, the heaters will shut off, the fan will go to 2300 RPM, and if you have the option, the lifting device will lift up the lid of the back of the machine. So when I press this, you can now hear that. So the back is being pushed up, the fan is blowing harder, and when the machine comes to 90 degrees, it will shut off and be essentially standby like it was when we first got to the main screen. So that will conclude our training session, and if there's any questions, please give me a call, 704-794-4656. Thank you very much and have a great day.